This video is brought to you in part by the patrons of the Lazy Eyebrow, and from the comments and watch time from viewers like you. Thank you!
It was a beautiful morning on the island of Sodor. Thomas was just about to return to the main line after a peaceful run on his branch line. The birds were singing, Annie and Clarabelle were talking amongst themselves about their passengers, and Thomas was in bright spirits. Not long now, he told the coaches, as they rounded the final bend before—
Oi! Anata! Nato o kiremero samore yorimisen! Watashi wa anata shitsabo sasemisen! Hashiri rimaru samore wa ne! Shoshite anata o nokashimasu! Why, hello YouTube! Greetings from the Lazy Eyebrow to a very special review, at least for me anyway. This is the review for MPG01 Shouki. If you want to skip to the review, skip ahead to this timestamp. Otherwise, some of you may be asking, why is this so special to me? I haven't exactly hid the fact that model trains hold a special place in my life. I grew up watching Thomas the Tank Engine. Our balcony looked over a rail line that had about 3 freight trains roll through our town a day. At 6, I got my first HO scale railway as a Boxing Day gift from my parents. When we moved, our next house is a block away from the line that went to the last station on the Lakeshore West line, so I got to see the GO train 3 or 4 times a day. All the while, my model train collection steadily grew. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that trains have been with me my entire life, being a bigger component of my upbringing than even the main subject of this channel, that being Transformers. And some of these models have been with me for over 20 years as a result. So, when Takara announced that they were doing Raiden, you can imagine why my interest was piqued to say the least. Then, I found an interview that stated that not only were they making Raiden in general, they were also working with Tomex, their model trains division, as well as Japanese railways to bring us the most accurate licensed version of the locomotive they could, that also became a robot. And to top it all off, they made a locomotive that was a proportional HO scale model? I'm sorry, but did they look me up and go, what would make the Lazy Eyebrow drop his vouch and never buy Masterpiece again? Because this hits every single one of my niche interests. A transforming robot that converts into a scale model accurate locomotive? I don't think anybody is more excited to have this in hand than I am.
Well, I am. Not scientifically possible!
So anyway, what this has culminated in is a release I'm super excited for. So to preface this review for all of you that are just joining in now from the timestamp, my expectations are unrealistically high. I have avoided any further news on this set like this was endgame all over for me. I'm going into this review blind, and rather than filming everything, then writing the script, I'm writing each segment and recording it as I go into each mode so that my opinion of one mode does not taint the opinion of the other. So with that out of the way, let's open up this box and see what's inside. So, right out of the gate, here's what you get in the box. And we'll get to this later, but look at that! Packaged in alt mode. Man, I miss this, being greeted with the vehicle first thing. Some days I really do miss the Masterpiece line. Anyway, enough box talk. Let's lay down some actual tracks, and believe me, we'll get to what I mean about that later, and take a look at our star attraction for the day. So, here he is in locomotive mode, and what a beautiful locomotive it is. I mean, it's a little panel heavy, but for the length of this thing and what it's going to need to do, I'm not entirely surprised, honestly. The design in general is really well done proportionally, and accurate too. You've got the headlights here made of translucent plastic, so much so it would be a fairly simple task of installing LED lights in there if I could find room for a battery pack, depending of course on how this thing will transform. The grey bullet style nose, which is what these trains looked like before adopting the design of the Kingfisher beak for peak efficiency.
Which was the style at the time.
I love the cream color they've applied to the engine, contrasted with a dark blue. It really gives the engine this distinguished look, which I suppose is more a compliment to the prototype than it is to the figure emulating the original. You get molded doors for Intenchi, molded passenger doors, as since this is an electric locomotive, this entire length is also a passenger compartment, and as such features a large amount of clear windows, which is semi-unfortunate. I mean, it's cool that we get windows, but instead of, say, a passenger compartment to look at, we get robot junk to look at. And absolutely this makes sense, and it's not a complaint that we don't have seats to look at like a scale model coach. I'm just saying the effort to make these windows clear probably would have been better served making window decals versus painting up clear plastic. Anyway, other fun details you get are all these accurately molded vents in other parts of the roof. And finally, a door to travel between cars in the back, and a coupler that we'll be using for the other locomotives. It turns to accommodate the train turning, which I find laughable, but we'll get there. Otherwise, man, this is just so well modeled. I can't help but grin like an idiot as I look over this thing and think to myself that this thing is also going to transform later.
Oh, my sweet summer child.
Initially, I found myself wondering where the pantographs were, but hey, even that omission is accurate, as on the prototype, the pantographs are located on the second car, right where the locomotive and the carriage were coupled. So, I mean, as much as I wish we had one here, since Shouki is unfortunately alone and will never pull a rack of coaches from the Shinkansen Series 0, bonus points to them for accuracy in this regard. So those points are what I really like about this locomotive, and in general, I'm super happy with what I've covered up to this point. However, that's not to say this thing is flawless. Let's flip to the underside and take a peek there. As far as kibble goes, Shouki tends to conceal himself fairly well. Like, from the angle that you view the locomotive, it looks really well placed, and the tracks do a great deal to hide it all. My main beef, however, are these bogies. Like, honestly, what is up with these? Like, I guess from this angle they look passable, but their construction, especially for A, being this expensive, and B, having worked with the model railway division of Takara Tomy, is a bit disappointing. They're just plastic wheels held onto loosely by a pin. Like, sure, plastic is used frequently enough in the model train world, but I'd be remiss if I said I wasn't hoping for a metal wheel solid construction axle. And that aside, these flanges are just outright pathetic. More often than not, the thing would rather derail than stay on the rails. And speaking of staying on the rails, let's get to my biggest point of contention with this thing so far. These bogies don't actually turn. They are very much locked in this straight traveling configuration, and that really just gets my knickers in a twist. I get at the end of the day this isn't a super duper big deal, but I don't know, to me this is like getting a really nice sandwich with lettuce and cheese and meat and maybe even a bit of bacon in there, but then you find out someone apparently forgot to put in some mayo and mustard. I mean, it's still an alright sandwich, but like, yeah, sandwich just isn't a sandwich with a disgusting taste of Miracle Whip. For real though, this costs as much as an actual model locomotive, and I'm personally alright paying that much. I'm used to seeing price tags like this for model trains. I mean, look at the price for the actual HO scale Shinkansen 0 series train set. I was considering getting this as a bonus extra for the video, but $600 is a tad in my price range. And in hindsight, I'm glad I didn't. It would have been really embarrassing watching the TGV diverted onto the sub to watch Shouki here hit that same switch and then inadvertently get derailed from sheer lack of competence. If this were a legacy release, I don't think I would have cared. Heck, Astrotrain doesn't even run on track despite being HO scaled, and I was pleased he was a semi-decent locomotive at all. But again, this is masterpiece. This is, there is no budget, and therefore we get to make the best thing ever and charge whatever it costs. And they just straight up skipped basic functionality to be fully compatible with something they made a big deal that it was even compatible with in the first place. Anyway, that's my ramblings about turning bogies. That aside, he is a really nice locomotive mode. So, as for other stuff you get in the box, let's get the obvious out of the way, a set of instructions and a collector's card. The collector's card of which causes me to laugh sadly in the sense that featured here is the train that Shouki will never actually get to pull. Next, you get these two sections of track that snap together with a T-joint like so, and then Shouki just pops on top like any other 16mm gauge rails. I'm not going to even attempt to sugarcoat this. These are borderline awful. They are entirely made of plastic, with the ballast and the ties being of a unibody plastic construction. There's a lack of wood grain texture here, and coupled with the light gray color, these might suggest these are concrete ties, and all that in and of itself would be passable if the rails weren't also made of plastic and then just vacuum chromed gold. Again, this is masterpiece. I can't fathom why they didn't include some sort of metal rail here, whether that be brass, steel, or nickel silver, or even aluminum or stainless steel, since conductivity isn't even a requirement. The only real function these sections serve that can't be accomplished by existing track is grooves cut into the base so that you can borrow a flight stand from a previous release, again something that wasn't included, and secure this to the base. But even in this scenario, it's not like there isn't a precedent for this type of rail with ballast included design. This is Bachmann's Easy Track system. It features varying lengths of track, though the most common straight section is 9 inches long, and it connects together so you can run your trains on something like carpet, for instance. Why something of this caliber, and this is even the cheaper version of this stuff, wasn't included is beyond me. Like, I paid $5 for a pack of 6 pieces at a hobby fair. So my point is, this stuff exists, and it's very cheaply mass-produced, and to see these plastic rails with this gold chrome on it, it's gonna look real ugly once chipping starts becoming a thing, and that's really annoying. Anyway, since we briefly talked about it, let's discuss the flight stand. This can be accessed by flipping over the locomotive, lifting up and rotating this chest piece, opening it up, and then flipping up these two sides, then plugging in the clear plastic adapter. This adapter, as mentioned, is designed to integrate seamlessly with stands included in other highly priced masterpiece sets, of which I haven't purchased. However, that hole there without the adapter is 3mm, and I have plugins for that aplenty. So even you, Mr. Mainly Collects Retail Figures, can display your Shinkansen Series 0 hurtling through the air. How Takara plans to address all 6 of them linked together, commonly rocketing through time and space as seen in the show, is a bit of a mystery to me, but that's on them and not something I have to concern myself with. A blaster is also included. That plugs into the bottom with enough clearance for the rails, which is an excellent touch. The Raiden chest piece is included, which means that, yes, unfortunately, this combiner comes with some level of parts forming. What's neat, though, is it's designed to fold up, and then if you take Shouki's entire nose section and pull it down, split it apart, tab in the chest piece's asymmetric tab, flip up these parts, and then clamshell the cab around it, you can get yourself onboard part storage. Neato! However, something else I find way more interesting to put in there are the final accessories. So here you get 2 giant chairs, and by giant I mean if these were in scale with the train, then the backrest would be 1.8 meters tall or 97 centimeters wide. So we're talking this size. Anyway, these are meant to hold Spike and Daniel that come with MP22, which if I'm not mistaken, these figures measure out to be roughly 144-ish, which is O scale, which for those of you that don't know, HO means half O scale. In other words, Shouki has seats intended to fit figures that are twice the size of an HO scale human. One of these days I plan on printing seats that are actually HO scale, as flipping down the backrest really doesn't help things, as actual HO scaled people like this drunk hobo aren't going to fit in here unless you glue them down or something. But hey, once you get them in there, they actually look kinda nice. And he and this very fashionable woman with a nice hat that feels inclined to wave at everybody can pilot this train off together into the sunset. I've been told this backrest flips down for Diaclone figures. Those are 160 though, so again, those aren't even in scale. Anyway, size comparison, speaking of scale. The only 2 relevant figures I have for this include MP12G and MP28, which, I mean, as silly as that kinda looks, it's not like this wasn't the scale in the show sometimes, so it gets a pass for masterpiece scale. Now for the part that I've been personally waiting to get to. What is the actual scale? So in the interviews, and heck, as far as I can tell, the instructions even list them as being HO scale, but how true is that really? Well, I measured, and this locomotive comes in at these measurements, and the Shinkansen 0 series comes in here, which means the actual scale is here after doing the math, give or take. And the average of all of that comes to this. So yeah, HO scale indeed, or at least close enough. Which, oh man, does this mean he ever scales with a lot? Just to get it out of the way though, this means he doesn't scale with either Siege Astrotrain or my model that runs on HO scale track. Both of these are based on D51s that run on Cape Gauge rails, and believe me, we'll get to that on part 2 of the series. So unless you want to consider Astrotrain that rare South Korean variant that ran on standard gauge, Siege Astrotrain actually scales with 164, which is Hot Wheels scale coincidentally. Shouki then scales officially with the Tycho Transformers Battle train set. Earthrise, and now apparently Studio Series 86, Seekers, and their F-15 mode. Studio Series Movie Starscream with its F-22 Raptor, Titans Return Blitzwing and its MiG-25, Studio Series Shatter as the AV-8B Harrier, and unofficially with my HO scale Autobot cars and Decepticon cars. And of course, being HO scale, this also means he scales with anything you can throw at it that also falls within this common model railroading scale. So that was an exhaustive look at the locomotive. I'll be honest, I'm a little disappointed in some of the features, the track and the wheels especially, but above all else, I was expecting the bogies at least to turn, and had they have done so, I don't think I would have been feeling this let down with the figure, as minor as something like that is. That being said, I bought this so I could have a transformer that was designed to blend into my HO scale railway fairly seamlessly. And aside from no longer being able to couple this up as a dummy locomotive to a Series 0 consist, I'd say this does exactly what I bought it for, and boy does it ever scratch that scale itch. So, is the locomotive worth the entry fee? Almost. Thankfully there's a robot we have yet to go to, so let's see if that mode holds up just as well.
The Transformers will return after these messages.
This episode of Lazy Eyebrow is sponsored by Rodimus Toys. Rodimus Toys is a photographer that specializes in magazine-style cover with a focus on posing as Transformers in an interesting way. You can find him on TikTok, Instagram, or Twitter. Now back to the episode.
We now return to the Transformers.
So to transform Shouki, start by pulling down this panel of translucent painted plastic, followed by this roof panel. Unpeg the back bogie from this whole section and split the whole thing apart. On the right leg, pull this panel down, accordion out the leg halfway, rotate it in 90 degrees, and then finish the accordion until it pegs in. Then close that back door up. Take that panel you pulled down earlier and wrap it around until it pegs into more clear plastic, and then fold in this little flap. Rotate the whole leg's assembly 90 degrees, pull down the back panel, rotate all of it down, flip up the foot, and then fold in the panel so that this beautifully painted surface becomes more or less what the entire robot supports itself on.
Now pay close attention to that ham, because it's not the last time you're going to see that ham in the story.
And that's one leg done. Wait, that's it? Aw, you can't be serious. Alright, on to the other leg. You pull this door down, then the armature that contains the rear bogie, and then the leg more or less transforms the same way. You fold in that door, collapse in the armature, then slide out the bogie on its pin. And I've got to admit, I've never seen this technique in an official capacity before. Sliding along a pin is the kind of janky movement I've only seen a small number of times in third party, and I gotta tell you, it didn't feel good then, and it doesn't feel good now. Anyway, foot transforms the same way. Well, those are the legs, or what attempts to be legs. On to the upper half. Start by pulling the cab down from the rest of the unit, split apart the arms, and then move away the cab on an armature. Oh, joy. On the back, pull away the roof of the cab, and hey, neat! They wrap the head in plastic to protect the finish during shipping. That's kind of awesome. Alright, anyway, fold in these roof bits. On the arm, pull the roof away from more clear plastic. Fold these panels outwards on a particularly stiff joint, then open up these clear panels. Fold the arms all the way out, then down, then rotate these panels to become upper shoulder guards. On the shoulders, fold in these tabs and plug that into clear plastic. Back on top, rotate the head up, then rotate the armature base 180 degrees. Fold out these shoulder clips and then plug that into the back of the neck until the back is flush. At the cab, split that open, and you can either remove the drunk hobo and his new fashionable girlfriend, or you can leave them there. There'll be enough space in the end for them to literally just hang out, but for now I'm going to remove them. Rotate out these tabs for some reason. The instructions say to do so, but heck if I know why. Collapse the flap connecting the cab and the armature in half at 90 degrees of the cab. On the back, pull out this connector, then rotate up the cab and clip that in. Fold these tabs down, open up the arms, pull the hands out, and close it back up. Then rotate the arms 180 degrees. Pull down these side skirts, pull out the chest, rotate it 90 degrees, and push it back into place, and you're done. Alright, so it's a new day from my perspective. I've slept on the transformation, I've gone back and forth a few times off camera this morning, and here's my thoughts on the process. The legs are fine. I don't like the way that inner calf panel has to move, but it's serviceable. I'm still not fond of that sliding pin though. The way this bogie has to move is just lame. The upper part of the transformation can just take a hike though. Some of these joints are too stiff. I really despise how these shoulder guards have to move and rotate and squeeze their way past everything to end up on top, and that's resulted in a few paint chips. But the benefit of all that is that the arm gets to move independent of them, so that's at least nice. I don't like how a bunch of the locomotive just hangs out here behind the arms as useless kibble. And boy howdy, have I mentioned my disdain for armature transformations before and how it only serves for people to pretend they're not parts forming, which is what the original toy did in the first place. Like, this segment here is die-cast, and it is only one of 3 die-cast parts in this whole set. Like, I saw someone gushing about how cool it is that this thing featured die-cast parts, and like, nah, not really. These features these 3 parts, and I'm sure the only reason they exist is because this armature would have snapped as well as probably those joints, like it was doing for Earthrise Cliffjumper back in the day, and rather than making the train cab parts for him like Cliffjumper's trunk, the material for the armature required an upgrade in order for it to pass inspection. On the plus side, though, it was simple enough that this morning I didn't need to refer back to footage or instructions or anything to go back and forth, so, I mean, at least it's got that going for it in terms of intuitiveness, and on top of that, there are absolutely no faux parts, which is always a plus in my book. In short, though, nothing about this transformation made me go, whoa, that's so clever! More often than not, I found myself asking why things needed to be this way, or being frustrated at the lack of clearance, or what have you. All that aside though, let's talk about what this transformation has left us with. Shouki as a robot is alright at best. Let's go from the ground up. And keep in mind, some of the opinion may change, as I don't quite know how much of this is required for the torso yet. The toes are nice, quite show accurate, and I love their trapezoidal nature. Unfortunately though, they've decided to make the main base of the foot a painted surface, and scares the living daylights out of me as far as the finish goes. I mean, I already have a bit of scuff marks on one section. I like that the doors for the passenger compartment made their way onto the base of the foot, really going that extra mile to showcase how incredibly massive this robot would be in real life. The back of the legs though are just the worst! Like, I get heavy Siege Datsun vibes from the hollowness of it all, and it genuinely feels like this should have been addressed somehow. Like, here's 3 suggestions in order from least to most preferred. Have the back of the legs be filled out with some of that kibble from the back of the arm somehow. Rework the leg so that hinge could be added here to slim the leg down and give it 3 sides instead of 2. Have this painted surface be the back of the legs and have the edge of it be what rests on the ground instead of the entire train face. Or I don't know, something to slim these legs down a bit and fill out the back of them. Like, even the side that houses the bogey, while marginally better, still feels incomplete. Moving on though, I love the blocky nature of the thighs. The waist and torso is adorned with more of that gorgeous dark blue paint that just pops against the cream. Like, I love the scheme on the train, so to see those same colors in the robot is just awesome. I'm not fond of these train panels here. I didn't like the journey to get them there. They're not accurate to the toy or the cartoon, but they don't look overly bad here either. And it is nice to have more of the locomotive showing, so that is one upside, I guess. And well, that same sentiment can be applied to the sides of the arms as well. On the other hand though, I rather despise all this great junk back here. There was no clever integration into the robot for it at all. It just hangs out back here, interfering with the arm articulation, and just looks like a cluttered mess. Like, here's some pictures of what this section would look like with all of that removed, and just what a difference it makes. Had this all been dealt with, I might have been more inclined to forgive the legs, but nah, as is, this whole robot as a complete package just feels unpolished. That being said, the instructions suggest that you can also splay them out like a cloak, so I mean, that's kind of nice looking. It frees the arms a little bit, and it makes it feel like an aesthetic placement of vehicle parts versus extra kibble we didn't know what to do with, which it still kind of is. Anyway, moving on. Some have contention with the back of the figure, what with the cab hanging out here and all. I don't personally. I was able to fold the armature in a way that it sits a little more flush than the instructions would have you believe. It's accurate to both toy and show, and it makes for a nice backpack for the figure. That being said, knowing that this has absolutely nothing to do for the robot mode annoys me even more about the bogey. Like, just for fun, let's tear this thing apart and see what it's all about and why things apparently had to be this way. Here's how this thing is assembled. You have this frame here, these pins go into the section here to act as axles, these side frames wrap around it, and the screw holds it all together while the cab itself slides along the frame, never actually interacting with the parts that make up the bogey. All they literally had to do was make this frame a flat piece with a hole in it, not unlike what they already do for Wheels and Chug, then make a bogey with a collapsible mushroom peg, and away you go. Locomotive articulation, it really was that simple. Genuinely expected more from a collaboration with a company division that specializes in model trains. Anyway, we finally come to the head, and, well, it's a really, really nice head sculpt, invoking the very essence of a Headmaster Shouki. Right down to these shoulder vents. I have yet to figure out their purpose, but they look cool nonetheless. A+. So, that's robot mode. Visually, it feels aimless. In fact, the only parts of the robot that feel like they hit a tight, refined appearance are the ones that don't appear in alt mode. And as such, it's left this robot feeling like he's wearing a locomotive rather than being one. As opposed to other Masterpiece figures, and to some extent even some Chug ones, that feel like they're just as much their vehicle as they are their robot, and that's quite the shame for Shouki here.
The Transformers will return after these messages.
This video is also sponsored by me at thelaceyeyebrow.com, where you can go and buy yourself a 3D printed upgrade for your Transformers.
We now return to the Transformers.
As for accessories for the robot mode, the track connects together once more to receive someone else's flight stand. That port plugs right into the bottom of his fanny by way of molded geometry and a 3mm port. So yes, technically if you don't have another expensive masterpiece, you can still get him Supermaning his way through the Stratos. You still get the O-scale seats from the locomotive, and they don't really have any function here in this mode, unless you felt like holding them, or the O-scale people that came with MP22, but of course you can always keep them plugged into the cab, and they're not really going anywhere for the robot, as there's enough room back there for that. However, as hinted through text editing earlier in this video, I've got something else that can store here. Being that Shouki is HO scale, I designed a cab that is the proper scale that is modeled off the interior of the Shinkansen Series 0, that will also accept HO scaled sitting people you can just buy off Amazon. I ended up painting mine in the Shinkansen uniform of the Air though. Anyway, this plugs into the same ports as the chairs use, store completely fine in robot mode, and really adds that extra detail to the locomotive whether you're looking at it from the interior or you're looking at it from the exterior. You can find the design of which to print your own in either filament or resin on my Cults 3D page, or you can buy your own printed part on my website, thelazyeyebrow.com. But say you're not into realism type and you just want to store the parts. Well, you can absolutely store the Raiden shield there too. It all fits. So how about one last accessory? Shouki gets his gun, and it's a fairly nice design. It plugs in like any other masterpiece in the sense that it has a tab that plugs into the hand, and the fingers come over top as well as the thumb for a bit more natural looking pose than we're used to these days, and well, it certainly does look nice in there. And as an added feature, the barrel can fold in, and then Shouki can shove the gun down into the back of the shin with a little plug, and it just tabs right in there. And you know, for all that complaining I did about the scrawny legs, check this out. You just pop that gun in there and look at this! The leg is fixed! Takara has done it again! For real, this is nice storage, but for everyone telling me that the gun fills in this gap and makes the leg look better, no. Like, feel free to keep on believing this, but no. Anyway, as for the Raiden crest, it can unfold, this tab can open up, and then it can plug on to one of the clear plastic arm tabs so that as Google Translate tells me the instructions say, by wearing it on your arm, it will be a shield! And yes, it most certainly can be. Now he also has a third mode. I'm not going to be taking too deep of a look at it here. I'll save that for the complete Raiden package, or at least if I ever make it to that. But let's quickly swap over to it. This is the chest, and wow. It's not bad per se, but I'm not really thrilled by it either. Here's the good. The arm kibble that the instructions refer to as a cloak have made themselves wings for Raiden, and I guess that's an alright use for it. The rest of it is wrapped around the arms, making them a solid, cohesive chunk that features double slots for a secure connection to the arm locomotives that we still have yet to see. And those are on nice ratchets independent of the arm articulation. That's kind of all I like though. I don't like how the management of the cloak has left the Raiden wings stuck to their shoulder joint, therefore making them turn too. I don't like the pathetic tabs pretending to keep the cab in place. To their credit, the ratchets are still enough that they keep the leg backpack secure enough, but that doesn't really change the fact that, by design, the legs just hang out back there with nowhere really to go. On the flip side, though, this explains why they chose to make the legs a little thinner, though, as the shoulder joints need room for clearance sake. I don't know, this whole thing feels needlessly complicated. Take something like fellow 6-member Gestalt chest Hook. Through various incarnations of toy versions, his Gestalt mode is basically take the vehicle, fold it in half, extend connection points, and bring up the head. It's simple, it's effective, and it's a fairly sturdy, locked-together chest brick. And then you have this guy. And for me at least, the chest's not pegging in right, those weird clamp things to lock the shoulders together like to pop out, and again, the legs are just being held by Shouki's ratchet joints. And on a related note, obviously I'll have to wait for Kain to come out before making an official stance, but looking down here, I'm not entirely hopeful for whatever connection they're going to make between the two for Raiden's waist. Nothing really jumps out at me as an obvious connection port, and that sorta has me worried, and here's why. Shouki's been not much more than a robot wearing a train with parts kinda hanging off everywhere. The proportions are a bit wonky, and if these are the design choices they're showing us that they have no qualms making for the robot, and already seeing a little bit for the Gestalt with the legs hanging off the back with nowhere creative for them to go, I feel like this first masterpiece combiner from Takara is very well on track for a train wreck. I hope I'm wrong, but time will tell for sure. Anyway, let's pop back over to the robot and discuss articulation. Head is on a ball joint for all sorts of spin and tilt, provided that the chin doesn't collide with the shoulder vents. Arms can rotate 90 degrees unless you move the translucent arm kibble up, and then they can go all the way up with it. Slay the cloak of Kib out to get slightly more backwards movement. Arms can go all the way out, the bicep swivels like a champ when it's not working itself out of the mushroom slot, and there's a double jointed elbow. Wrist swivels this way and a little bit that way, both of which are encumbered by the arm cable colliding with the thumb, meaning that Shouki can't turn his hand all the way upright to extend his hand out and ask, "Do you trust me?" Fingers open with a molded 3, the index and the thumb all on their own joints. These are clearly articulated for gun use only, as it's not like you can really do anything expressive with these hands, like pointing or anything else beyond conversational hands, which makes me wonder what the point of articulating them at all was. Despite the copious amounts of kibble, the waist swivel works exceptionally well. Like, I'm impressed I wasn't dealing with any sort of collision here. All the flaps open to reveal articulation for the hips in all the way out regard, most of the way forward, and barely back at all. It's serviceable, I guess. I mean, that's at least a nice spread. Thigh swivel and knees that bend a bit past 90 degrees, slight ankle tilt, and I suppose you could work the transformation joints to get some sort of toe wiggle out of that. But anyway, the articulation range is alright at best. But then you're tied up in proportional wonk, and man, he just does not pull off a great hero landing. It's a benchmark pose that he's easily shown up by the likes of Core Class, Legends Class, Deluxe Class, Voyager Class, Leader Class, all the way up to Commander Class. I am genuinely flummoxed why of all these bots with the cheaper price points are out articulating this masterpiece. But wait, maybe you're saying to yourself, well, combiner limitations, you're just not being fair to the bot. And to that I say, here's a 6-year-old Combiner Wars hotspot mold doing most of the things this masterpiece is doing here, save for a few missing points of articulation, and yet it's still pulling off better poses. It transforms into a similar vehicle shape with similar kibble management, both of which do very similar things for their chest mode, with the exception that Shouki should have legs become a backpack, and it has to wait for Yukikaze before the combiner head can be accessed, and it has to parts form the chest crest. I'm strongly against the argument that size dictates worth. That's why I'm bringing all of this up now rather than while I'm talking about robot scale. Like, for example, you could have this 12-inch Loki for $9, or you could have this 6-inch T'Challa for almost $50 that does so much more. But here's the thing. I paid $25 Canadian for this hotspot. But you know what? To be fair, it's a Voyager, so let's just for sake of argument say I paid for it today. That's still $50 Canadian for Hotspot, who's doing a large chunk of what Shouki is doing, and arguably better at that. Shouki of which cost me $206 Canadian plus tax. I just don't see the value here. So anyway, let's talk about that scale. Here he is with a collection of Masterpiece bots I have, that being Hot Rod version 2, G2 Sideswipe, Megatron version 2, and Soundwave version 1. If you want my honest opinion, I'm not bothered by this scale. Masterpiece, well, not a hard and fast rule, typically runs close to G-scale railways or Gauge 1 or whatever you want to call it, plus or minus 132 scale basically. The designers, I'm sure, were aware of those follies of making these vehicles even close to that, as you'll see shortly. However, in terms of on-screen scaling, the train bots were all about the size of Chrome Dome and other cars. And given that the 87 animators had G1 Shouki, which ended up being N-scale to reference their photos on, I'm not exactly surprised that on-screen they were generally drawn rather small compared to everyone else. So yeah, on-screen wise, this is close enough. And even if you don't like it, they straight up put these bots in a different Masterpiece subline, so you could even argue that they're not supposed to scale, just supposed to be 187 trains, and their scale is their own, and that's that. Which, I mean, writing that, it just occurred to me, what if MPG just eventually came to mean a subline where everything was vehicularly scaled? Man, I would go broke living in that fantasy world. So let's take a minute to dive a little bit into what said fantasy world would look like. Here you have MPG Shouki standing next to 187 scaled jets like Earthrise Skywarp, Titan's Return Blitzwing, Siege Astrotrain if we honor the Mika 7 data, Movie Starscream, and Movie Shatter. But hey, I've got all that scale data up on my website. Let's do some math and take this a bit further. This is what Transformers would look like if everything were in vehicular scale with each other. And while not practical obviously, I think it would be absolutely nuts to have a collection that looked like this. So that was Shouki, the first look we've got in hand of the MPG train bots Takara is making. Plain and simple, I am unimpressed. To sum up my main points earlier, I feel like the chest mode is doing more or less the same things as a Combiner Wars hotspot for 4 times the cost. He's wearing his train like a child wears a costume, the proportions of the robot are all out of whack in the name of Gestalt, despite other figures proving that this sort of thing can be done. There's a disgusting amount of clear plastic on display, with a lot of it having to be tabbed into, or having critical hinges attached to it. Tolerances are a nuisance, and things have to be in just the right spot for things to move, and even then, there's a lot of sliding over parts, which has resulted in a bit of paint chipping. And speaking of paint chipping, they decided to make a painted surface the ground contact point for the foot, and that's sure gone over well for this animation session.
See? There's that ham again.
Just overall, this has been a really unpleasant experience for me. Like I said, the train mode alone barely hits the value mark, and the robot and Gestalt chests certainly don't make up for that deficiency in my opinion. Which isn't to say there aren't any positives though. For one, there is absolutely zero faux parts, and I actually rather appreciate that effort. Feels like there's way too much of that going on these days. It unintentionally scales with a bunch of chug jets in a realistic sense, and that hits me in the most satisfying way. The paint when not beat up is rather nice looking, and it matches fairly well with the cast colors, and the train isn't bad looking when it sits there either. That's kind of all I got. Genuinely sorry if you came to this video expecting me to be excited for the whole way through, and I've ended up being more upset with a toy than Perspective End is during an average video. But yeah, this thing has been a massive letdown. I was planning on stopping my collecting here. I only wanted a transforming HO scale locomotive, and by definition, I got what I came for better or for worse. But a detail revealed about Getsue made me pull the trigger on that one, so I'll definitely be giving this set another chance. But that being said, one of 2 things are going to have to happen in order for me to cover all 6 of these things. Either Getsue is dang near perfect and completely wins over my opinion on this set, or I get help somehow obtaining the remaining 4 locomotives. I guess we'll see what happens when Getsue gets here, but as far as Shouki, no, I just can't recommend this in good faith. This has been the Lazy Eyebrow.
Well, if that wasn't a train wreck, I don't know what is. I got this guy, and I was super excited, as you may have noticed in the prologue, but wow, did I ever go through the 5 stages of grief while messing about with this thing. Such a disappointment, really. This one goes out to Archives of Cybertron for being a standout patron. You are awesome. So where do we go from here? Well, special thanks to Prologue, or I don't know, I think I was pronouncing that one wrong, for the new symbol. 10 years, and let's go for another decade, and now we've got a new symbol. We've rebranded, isn't that nice? So where do we go from here? Well, tune in next time where I promise we'll do Lego Optimus Prime, but I will inevitably disappoint you because I can't seem to keep my stories straight. We said I'd do Megatron, then I said we'd do this, and look where we are today. We're with a disappointment. I've disappointed myself, I've probably disappointed you, and I'm probably going to disappoint you again, because that's who I am. Anyway, I'm rambling on. Hopefully I get to Lego Optimus next. I'd really like to get to that and really get that off my plate and out of here and probably back to Beast Wars Megatron, but inevitably something else will show up for that, guaranteed. Thanks again for everyone that's watched. Thank you all for subscribing and for sticking with me, and away we go.